the Storm Center going for us here this morning because we've got some delays to tell you about.
Storm Center.
Storm Center brought to you this morning by our friends at Accent Fuels, Route 56 East, Homer City. River Valley's on a district-wide remote learning day today. There are 2-hour delays for Apollo Ridge, Armstrong, and Derry school districts. And the Indiana County Head Start Centers, they are closed. That is Storm Center. It's brought to you by Accent Fuels, Route 56 East in Homer City. And it is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, 101.1 FM, AM 1160. He's Bob Pollock in the studio with us here this morning as we get it rolling on this Friday. Our conversation is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. If you have a question for Bob, you'd like to call and ask him, you could call either 349-WCCS, that's 349-9227, or 479-1160. And good morning to you.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fabulously well on this Friday. It's chilly.
Yeah, it is a little bit.
Extra cold
Although
yesterday,
a little,
huh?
yeah, yesterday. And we're going to get more of that the
Yeah,
next couple of days.
AccuWeather says we're down to 6 degrees tonight. It was minus 15 on my way in yesterday morning.
Yay.
I felt like that International Falls, Minnesota commercial where they did the Die Hard batteries many years ago. Remember those?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you didn't have one, you were in trouble.
That was the iconic commercial. All right, so when we think about where we are this time, we're the last Friday of January. Groundhog Day is coming up next week. Spring is 6 weeks away then. And it's getting here. It's inching its way closer.
One slow day at a time.
Yeah, one slow day at a time. So when we think about that and what we should be doing in terms of planting, we talked about this a little last week too. Planting lawns, planting gardens, starting seeds indoors. Is it time to do that yet?
It could be for some things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, depending on how you're going to plant them. If you're going to plant them indoors or in a greenhouse or a protected structure where you're providing supplemental heating and maybe supplemental lighting, then sure, there are things that you could be seeding now in order to plan ahead and when you want to start harvesting those crops. So yes,
vegetables.
Now things going outside a little early for that.
Mm-hmm. There are people who do things like lettuce all year long, right?
Right. Yeah, a lot of those shorter day crops, you can fit them in. They might only take 45 or 50 days so that you can keep planting successive crops all year round if you want to. But you do need to have a little bit of facilities. Doesn't have to be anything spectacular, but just some heat and light.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you, was in terms of resources that you have available at Extension, for somebody that wants to start gardening indoors, is there a one sheet or a two sheet or something that's going to give them the basics that they need?
Yes, there are things out there that can help with that, absolutely. And a lot of it comes back to just looking at, well, what plant do I want to grow? Whether it's a vegetable plant or a house plant or whatever it might be, looking at that, what does it take to grow lettuce, for example? Or maybe if I want to plant some, herbs are another common one that can be planted indoors or maintained indoors. And then it's just a matter of selecting the right conditions, providing the right conditions so that those plants can thrive.
Yeah. And generally that's going to have to do with heat, light, and moisture.
Yes. And lettuce is all growing above the soil line. And there are a number of different hydroponic, little, simple, compact hydroponic systems that you can purchase these days that you can, you could have a square foot gardening. That was a big theme, years ago. Outdoors was square foot gardening. And setting up the grid and all that, but doing it outside. Now you could do that. You could do that inside. Again, you just set it up the way you want it, and you can grow soilless in these hydroponic systems, which is just it's circulated water that you have to add nutrients to, of course, and then that circulates and grows the crop. If you want to grow carrots, then you need some sort of container.
Yeah.
So that the carrot, because since it's a root crop, It needs room to grow.
Going to go down.
But you can do that in potting soil.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's lots of options now. Carrots are a little longer deal, but that could be something fun to do with kids or grandkids.
Sure. Radishes are a fast
Radishes,
growing
yes,
thing.
yeah, and they don't take up near as much room, but you're right, that's quicker growing, and so if you're trying to get from point A to point B, or you just want some good, fresh, nutritious vegetables, those are things that you can cycle in there. Or if you don't want to get if you don't want to plant 100-day carrots that you have to sit and watch grow for months. And if you get bored easily, then that might not be the crop
for you.
What are you doing?
I'm sitting there watching the carrots grow. What are you doing? Well, you know what? You made a good point. That's something that parents can get involved and grandparents with their kids, and sort of give them a love for the science of it all, because it really is scientific.
It is, and those are just little experiments. And we used to do watching roots grow in a glass. You take a cutting and stick it in a glass jar in water, and so that you can actually see roots develop. And you can do that. You could do that in sand as well, especially with a terrarium or something like that had glass sides where some of those roots are going to develop along the sides. And so you can see that happening.
I noticed the other day, years ago, a big leaf fell off of a Christmas cactus at home, and we just took a cup and poured some water in it and stuck it in there. And I looked the other day, and it's been there for several years now. It's got a nice, healthy root structure underneath it, almost like a bulb underneath there, that I could probably stick in dirt right now. And,
you could.
And I could kill it in a matter of days.
Hopefully not. Well, obviously you haven't killed it yet.
Yeah. Well,
it's doing okay there on its own. Once you start
try to work
fiddling with it, then you'll mess it up.
Yeah, but that it's fascinating to watch, and even if you're not heavily into it, you learn some great things.
Yeah, and and even flower seeds, annual flower seeds, that can be another project.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember growing up, my mother just loved geraniums, and so my father in his work would visit various fruit and vegetable growers, but he visited some that had cuttings, and he would get cuttings from them or get starts, and then he'd bring all those home, and we'd have to pot them all up in 4-inch pots, and we had them under grow lights in the basement, and we did that every year for years, and then when they were big enough, we planted them outside and had red geraniums for the summer.
Yeah, it's an interesting subculture of people who they share seeds with each other, and gardening tips with each other. There are clubs, of course. Indiana Garden Club is one of them. But people really, really do come to love it as a science, but as an art form as well. And so you get to watch those sorts of things.
When I started an extension in Beaver County back a few years ago.
A few years ago, too.
Yeah, a few decades ago, 4 decades at this point. There was a group down in the Sewickley area, and there was a doctor there that just loved rhododendrons. Mm-hmm. And they had their group, and they actually propagated rhododendrons and azaleas. And he had various, things that he had crossed and, propagated and grew, and they would have meetings at his place and other people's places, and they'd walk around and they'd observe those plants. They didn't exactly know when they crossed 2 different ones that had nice characteristics what they would end up with when they grew them out, and they finally were able to get big enough that they flowered. But very interesting, and some of those projects can take decades to develop. We plant annual seeds, we can see the results of that in less than one growing season. And when you get into perennials and woody plants, it can take a lot longer.
Did want to ask you this. I know a fellow who loves to raise sunflowers, and last year, and he uses his sunflower seeds every year that he grows in order to get next year's sunflower crop. Last year, the worms got into the stalks and just destroyed his sunflowers. So he's going to zinnias this year. He asked me for my zinnia seeds. But when we think about what we're planting in our garden this year, and last year there were the worms that got after his sunflowers, should that deter him from going at it this year with sunflowers again? Or is the prevalence of them last year going to be an indication that they're going to hang around the neighborhood for a while?
Yeah. Now, and how many years has he been growing sunflowers?
A lot of them.
A lot of them, and that was the first year that happened. So it might not happen this year.
Especially not if he's planting zinnias.
Right, especially not. That'll could break the cycle there, depending on what those pests were and their life cycle. Mm-hmm. That might have been they built up and they were there, for a couple years, and then they just happened to do more damage this past year, but they might not do that this year. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't 100% give up on the sunflowers. Maybe if you move them a little bit, if you had another place to plant those, get some separation, not in that same soil, in another location, and then breaking that cycle, crop rotation, it is a huge help with breaking cycles of various pests.
Yeah.
Because if they don't have a susceptible plant to attack, then they have to go. They either die out or they go elsewhere.
They find out where you planted the new plant.
Yes.
Hey, it was over here all along.
And again, that goes back to the plants we choose to plant and looking up and researching a little bit, what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of these plants? What are, maybe this plant's really susceptible to something, but then, and that might just be the general species of that plant, but then there might be cultivars, there might be improvements of that plant that are resistant to some of those issues. It may not make them immune, but we know that we can build up insect resistance. We can also breed plants to help them, make them less favorable for that, or there might be other cultivars. Some plants within a species might have smoother leaves, but then there are other species or cultivars within that same plant family that have a little bit hairier leaves, and they're maybe more resistant to attack by some of those pests because those pests don't like hairy leaves. Yeah. They want those smooth leaves.
All right, there you go. Finally got around to talking about something substantial here right at the end of this segment. He's Bob Pollock.
We can continue it.
From the Extension Service, joining us here this morning on Indiana in the Morning. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.